Hello, welcome to the Family Values podcast. My name's Joe Woods.
My name is Tom Hicks.
If you are one of the very few people that listen at the moment, it's going to be a 2 week gap since you last heard us, just because we were not at the Herman Hill studios last week. We didn't have producer Harris and executive producer Chloe. It was me and Tom doing a classical recording, just the two of us on my phone. And it turns out I wasn't recording.
Yes, we had the stopwatch going, and we had we're going to call it our most in-depth and clever conversation ever,
with no one listening, and no one will ever hear it. Yeah. And we were getting ready to go out and for our friend's birthday drink, and so we were kind of giddy like two schoolgirls, and we nothing was captured.
No. But we've look at the silver lining. It means we've got double the amount of things to talk about this week.
Well, last week we only had Labour's manifesto,
or what we thought was going to be Labour's manifesto.
Yeah, we had some red herrings thrown at us from the Labour manifesto, so we basically devoted last week to that. This week we've got a bit more meat in regards to we have the full Labour manifesto, we have the Lib Dem manifesto, we get the Tory manifesto tomorrow, I think.
And we have the two leadership debates, although we'll say straight off the bat that we couldn't survive watching two in 1 week, and I think we only watched the head-to-head.
Both of us only managed to watch Tuesday's one on ITV. I missed Sky's one. Was it Sky yesterday?
No, it was BBC Question Time.
BBC Question Time.
Yeah.
I missed that last night.
Yes, but we can try and recreate it from what we know about the candidates. As pretty much for 3 weeks of an election in, about halfway through the campaign, I'm pretty confident that I can just rattle off the talking points of all the major parties verbatim at the moment, because they're just drilling them home at this point and not really moving from their messages.
So let's just get into the leadership debate. I mean, so me and Tom, just like the rest of the country, saw the ITV debate on Tuesday. It only consisted of, I mean, it's quite controversial because ITV only brought on both Johnson and Corbyn. I understand why. I may be a Lib Dem voter, but I totally understand why. Yeah. It's either going to be one or the other who will be Prime Minister.
Yes. And I think the closest that we'd come to this before was the debate in 2010 with when there was a freeway debate between...
And they actually allowed good old little Nick Clegg to come in.
Yes, and Nick Clegg very cleverly actually managed to put himself on an actual stage on that one.
And swung up in the opinion polls and actually ended up holding the balance of power in that election.
Although I still would maintain that it wasn't so much Nick Clegg's performance as it was Gordon Brown's lack of performance on that regard.
I mean, the one-eyed, shiny, bulb idiot he was the worst Labour leader, I think, at least in the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, Labour Prime Minister, I mean, there's been worse...
I was going to say, there might be a good candidate already at the moment.
There's been much worse Labour leaders, anywhere from Corbyn to Michael Foot. But yeah, I just want to bring up the point before we go a bit more in depth. Johnson really pissed me off on that on Tuesday's debate. As usual with any ministerial debate, as you know, an agenda is set. You've got these essentially chapters which questions that revolve around the individual part of party policy. Every question or every answer, Johnson turned it into Brexit. Labour has no policy on Brexit. We're pushing Brexit forward.
Yeah, it was every single time. It got so much that the audience were just groaning every single time he brought it back to it, because he'd clearly been given instructions to bring everything back to Brexit. Yep. And even though the audience were turning against that strategy, he kept on it right until the last minute.
I think that was the cum guzzler himself. Or the cum man, should I call him?
But yeah, I would. That really does have.
It has Cummins written all over it.
Yeah, exactly. His fingerprints are all there, and I would say that at the moment, Boris looks like he's just going. He just brings it back to 2 points. I'm going to get Brexit done, and Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to lead the country.
Which tells you there is a lack of. I know Johnson wants this to be the Brexit. The Brexit election, even though we've already had two prior Brexit elections. We've had the last election that was brought on by May, and then you got the 2015 election, which again was dominated by a prospective Brexit vote.
Yeah.
And I think Johnson, he's not shooting himself in the foot, because let's be honest, there's going to be another outcome than a Tory government at the end of this election. But I think Johnson's not doing himself favours by not having or not wanting to talk about other policy.
No, I think you're right about that because people get bored of the same thing. No matter how important the issue is, people will eventually think, okay, what else have you got? And and whilst he will rattle off his things about not selling the NHS to the US, and he's got his 20,000 police officers and his 40 extra hospitals. People will also sort of know those policies verbatim now, and they've both been picked apart a little bit as well. And he hasn't really got many ideas. And I think this is a more of a problem with governments that have been in power for more than a couple of terms, which is they've lost their originality when it comes to what they want to do.
Even in this, this really crucial Brexit crisis, point of the Brexit crisis, they've lost their anchor for governance.
Yeah, I mean, when David Cameron was campaigning, he had a very, very clear messages and goals were about what he wanted to change within the country. He wanted to keep the books back, get the books back on track, and then reform the welfare state.
It was the start of austerity to end austerity. He wanted to be seen as the man that made the mile.
Yes, to sort of stop the not so much stop the boom and bust cycle, but to have a level financial structure rather than going from loads of spending to no spending to loads of spending, which is what we've had to deal with and what Labour, I would say, probably want to bring us back to on that. Because if there was a Jeremy Corbyn government, then it would undoubtedly end in whenever it did end 5-10 years. The Tories will then use that either as an excuse or legitimately, depending on your point of view, to then re-implement.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is my favourite argument against anyone on the centre left who is toying with voting for Corbyn. Is do you essentially really want a 5 to 10 year stretch? And let's be fair, it'll be a 10-year stretch. There's no such thing as a one. Okay, Brexit's a different issue. I was going to say there's no such thing as a one-term prime minister. Okay, during Brexit, the Brexit crisis, that's different.
Yeah.
Once we go back to a relatively more normal period of governance. We'll go back to the eternal leaders we know. Yeah,
that has been the structure in this country for the last 40 years. Quite frankly, it's been the structure in most Western countries for a long time.
Most of the major Western countries, because there's a lot of Western countries where, again, because of a lack of a fixed term Parliament Act, they just will throw an election every 3 months.
Yeah, and even in the countries that have very, very set elections like America, every single president going back to Jimmy Carter has won 2 terms.
Yeah.
George Bush hadn't.
Carter was a one-term president, wasn't
he? Carter was a one-term president, and sorry, I'll correct that a little bit because the first Bush Senior was a one-term.
Yeah, Bush Senior.
But he was more of a continuation of Reagan, so I would argue that's more of Reagan's third term.
He essentially was, to a certain degree, Bush Senior was to Reagan what Brown was to Blair.
Very good comparison.
Except Brown kind of fucked it up in the end.
Yes, I mean, I always think this is interesting in how he was always, in my opinion, always going to lose that election because he was in charge of the economy leading up for years and years and years, and then we had a financial crisis which left the coffers completely empty. So I don't know how he thought he was ever going to get back in.
Any party that oversaw the start of a major recession is always going to be voted out.
Yeah, there's just no way, and that will happen if
it happens every 15 years when there is a major recession.
Yes, I mean you'll see that if as many economists are predicting, the global slowdown continues in 2020, it's really going to put a damper on Donald Trump's chances for re-election because that's been his main thing that he could actually tangibly say that he's done well.
Look at the economy.
Yeah, look at the economy.
It doesn't matter, how much. Look, I can give a shit about Trump either way, but it doesn't matter how much my leadership has divided the nation on a sort of unity and spiritual level. Look at the economics.
Yeah.
Look at the tax return. Well, not so much the tax returns, but look at the capital.
Yes. Look at the investment that's being pumped in, and look at the growth in both the stock market. And it is, as I say, the most tangible thing that he does actually have to point to. And one could argue it's the only tangible thing that he can point to because he can't exactly point to success on the domestic or foreign policy level because both of those have, quite frankly, been disasters.
I mean. By the way, let's just cover this because we've said this for the last few episodes. We've gone, there's nothing really to cover on the American. I think there is something to cover. I've got an agenda in front of me just to break the fourth wall, talking about the leadership debate. But just for a few minutes, I'm just going to break from this. The Democrat leadership race at the moment.
Yes.
Where do you see this going?
Well, it's interesting because up until a couple of weeks ago, I'd have said that Warren was the favourite. But Warren has really dipped in the polls in the last couple of weeks, and Biden's actually jumped back up again.
If Biden, okay,
I know. It's absolutely crazy.
I've only been hearing a lot of things secondhand. I've not been paying a load of attention the last 2 weeks, just because work's been so busy. But I did hear that Biden is looking like the contender again.
He is. He's kind of kept his support steady at around 30% for a long time, and then every so often it looks like it's dipping, and then it'll jump back up again.
Can I just say the Bloomberg entry of a few weeks ago? What happened to that is exactly what I thought would happen, which he would just drop off a cliff.
Yeah, he's got like 2%. He's got less than Andrew yet.
Wow, fuck.
Yeah.
When you've got less than the gang, I mean,
exactly.
It's point being, I always thought it'd drop off. It just nothing would come of it, just because I don't think the current Democratic Party, as it stands, wants an ultra-capitalist.
No, they don't want an ultra-capitalist, and particularly a billionaire. I mean, Bloomberg, you call Trump a billionaire, and there's questions whether he actually is a technical billionaire.
Yeah.
But Michael Bloomberg, there is no question, he's not just a billionaire, he's a rich billionaire. He's a big-ass billionaire.
Yeah.
And I just can't see the Democrats where they've basically put their soul of the party as being almost, not so much as to the extent of Jeremy Corbyn would do, but the sort of anti-billionaire party.
It's what we in the urban community call a player. Yes. But it seriously, I even though it's the Liberal Democrats, you're talking about a party that is supposed to be a capitalist, a free trade party. Yeah. We're now in a place, because of the lack of a left-wing party, a sort of European-style left-wing party in America, the Liberal Democrats have had to kind of become, half of it has had to become a European-style left-wing party.
Yes. And
like Labour.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment there's a big debate going on around the economics of, or even the term socialist over there. Because a lot of American left-wingers will say that they're socialist, but mean sort of a Scandinavian
They mean
type.
Scandinavian capitalist, which is essentially, well, the Scandinavian system's not a lot different to a lot of the systems of Europe in general.
Yeah.
It's just a higher tax base.
Yeah, I would say that all Western countries in particular are on a sort of socialist capitalist spectrum, and no one is at either end of the complete spectrum.
I don't even think that's necessarily correct. It's all capitalism. It just has a welfare system separate from the economy.
Yeah.
It's economically, these are capitalist countries. These are free market nations. They just have a big welfare system that is, completely separate from the economy.
Yeah, and the term sort of, particularly when you're trying to align when you get outside of the West, because most people would think that China, for instance, would be a socialist country, but if you actually look at their welfare system, it is absolute crap, even compared to America. Yeah. It is really, really bad.
We're not even just talking welfare in regards to what we see over here as in terms of unemployment benefits. I mean, we're talking healthcare systems.
Yeah,
we're talking,
exactly. So many more people. So many more people fall through the cracks in the Chinese system than they do even in the American system.
Fuck about. Yeah. I mean, the Chinese system is the meaning of cronyism.
Yes, and but it has on its label communism, so people get confused about that. But it's I find it quite interesting how they're sort of arguing over the term, in America at least, they're arguing over the term socialist, and no one can really agree on it, but they're all arguing against caricatures.
During the last election cycle in the States, do you remember when Bernie made he put some tweet out about how it should be a socialist country like Denmark? And Denmark's Prime Minister
came out and
responded on Twitter to him and said, "Actually, Bernie, we're not a socialist country. We are a capitalist country with a large welfare system."
Well, this is exactly what I'm getting at. They're sort of going through this weird semantic-based argument about socialism, and everyone's trying to sort of score points with their base, because that's what it has turned into in America.
I'm going to step forward here and say what I refer to as the socialist younger candidates within the current leadership debate. Well, not so much younger, but people like Elizabeth Warren, and even Sanders to a certain degree.
Sanders is definitely, by the American vernacular, he would be a socialist. By the American vernacular,
but I don't think he doesn't come from socialism. He doesn't come from union backing and union organisation. he comes from universities. He comes from essentially what a private business is.
He's more in tune with unions, or more traditionally in tune with unions than most Democratic politicians, but nowhere near the extent that a Jeremy Corbyn would be.
No, I mean, I've seen nothing in this current Lib Dem sort of leadership debate to show that he actually has any connections to the unions. I don't see him doing a Trump in the last election and trying to back jobs within the energy sector.
No, well, this is the other thing as well within the Democratic Party is there's a internal conflict which doesn't like to get acknowledged much between the sort of very pro-green element of the Democratic Party and the old-school unionists. Because the old-school unionists really don't like this green revolution, Green New Deal, whatever they say, because they fear it's going to kill a load of jobs.
The current leadership of the Labour Party here.
Yes.
The likes of Corbyn and McDonnell are not green. They're not. No. They're not new, fluffy Blairite kind of further left Blair. The further left end of the Blairite spectrum, you'll find a very pro-green, and even actually the sort of standard sort of Blairite spectrum, very pro-green. The old school, actual socialists, the likes of Corbyn and McDonnell, which come from kind of, I mean, they had a lot of connections to communism during the 70s and 80s. I mean, they knew members of government and the secret services, as we know from Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union. These are communists. They actually believe in mass industrialism backed by state funding.
Yeah, the means of production would be best served actually within the rubrics of, in air quotes, the people, as it were.
And I just fail to believe that a lot of these new, what are referred to as the socialist candidates within this Liberal Democrat race in America, not here, are sort of socialist industrialists.
Well, this is exactly the criticism, particularly of Elizabeth Warren, because there's a lot of people who on the left who would either they would definitely back Warren over most other people, but they would rather Bernie because they see Bernie as being more, for want of a better word, pure in his socialism than Warren is. Whereas Warren, they see a slightly more palatable version of Hillary Clinton, who knows better the progressive base, but as soon as the general comes, she'll run straight to the centre.
She knows the new progressive base because she's had to work with them. But in reality, she is really part of the old guard. I mean, she's a Pelosi disciple.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And she spent most of her career before entering politics as a Harvard law professor, and she's worth something like $15 million. She's the richest person. She's one of the richest people in the Senate. Definitely one of the most richest Democrats. Yeah.
I mean, Biden's up there. I mean,
Biden's pretty big. Yeah. But he's had. But to be fair, he's quite old, so he's
it's been a while since he's earned any money. So
but it is very interesting, particularly with the socialist aspect, because I don't know how much you've heard about the wealth tax which they're proposing over there.
Yes, yeah.
Where it's a bit difficult to see how much it's going to be, because there's been either a 2% wealth tax over $50 million or a 6% wealth tax. And a 6% one, I'm sort of looking at there with sort of my sort of financial background and thinking, very few people can increase their wealth by 6% every single year.
No, that's impossible.
Billionaires. So you're basically saying, right, we're going to make sure that you actually get poorer every single year.
Yeah.
Which is like a complete, in my opinion, ideological stupidity. And also, physically, it's ridiculous because you're going to be taking away the tax pool there.
Because you're talking about essentially destroying small business as we know it. I mean, to be fair, both the Liberal Democrats and the Republicans they always have that line of being the party of small business.
Yes.
To be fair, the new wing of the Democratic Party, I don't imagine I've ever said that. You would be essentially destroying small business by implementing that, even if that was a personal tax as opposed to a corporate tax, or.
But it's a personal tax on individuals who earn who have a wealth of more than $50 million. So it wouldn't so much affect.
You'd be destroying essentially small business.
Well, you'd be destroying anybody who would want to actually invest in it, because you have absolutely no incentive to get to be wealthier than $50 million. And anybody who's over $50 million will actually be a great boost to the British economy if they do that, because a lot of them will move over here. That's what happened when the French did it.
Oh, that's what happened with the fucking Scandinavia's a massive one. So Scandinavia, there's a big thing in the city of London with a lot of people who worked in the sort of financial world within Sweden, within Norway, Denmark, all moved here years ago to get away from their taxation base.
And in France, it happened as well. I saw a statistic, and I have no reason to doubt this, that we actually have the most millionaires, not even just per capita, but just in general, even more than Germany, because our tax structure is more kind.
It's kinder to
millionaires. That attracts them in and actually increases our receipts from them than it would
we're
be
not
normally.
Luxembourg, so but that's a whole different story.
It is.
But going back to the Liberal Democrat, I nearly said Lib Dem there. Liberal Democrat sort of candidate race. I mean, people are still talking about Biden as if he's too old, he's too doddering, he doesn't seem he's all there. How do you feel? I mean, where do you see this going?
I tend to agree that would be it is a valid criticism.
Because those similar criticisms about Clinton in the last election, not that she's old and doddering, but that she's ill and she's not well, I mean, they fucked her.
They really did, particularly when you compare him to Trump, who, even though they're of a similar age, Trump has a hell of a lot more energy.
Yeah.
And when Biden, I would say,
that's what that's what a diet that relies on red meat does for you.
Yeah,
and get Trump.
and rumored to be amphetamines as well.
Oh yeah.
Joe Rogan is very
I did see that this
susceptible
week.
to that, which is it's an interesting theory if it's true. But I've watched some of the Democratic debates, and he really does look slow. He looks like the oldest man on the stage, even though Bernie Sanders is much older than him.
I mean, because Sanders is going on 80, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. If Sanders wins 2 terms, he'd be like 86 by the end of the second term. It's absolutely crazy.
Oh my God.
But he doesn't actually seem like that, because he just seems like a man with a lot more
actually,
going for
if I'm correct, aren't Biden and Sanders about the same age?
I think Biden's a little bit younger, but not by much.
Right.
But if you were to see them
Sanders
side to side...
76, 77?
Yeah, roughly that.
78.
78, wow, fuck. So essentially, by the time, if he was to be the next US president, he'd be going on 80.
Yeah.
But Joe Biden is 77.
Okay, so
they're similar of age, but...
It's a fag paper between.
Yeah, exactly. But if you were to sort of... guess which one was younger, I would always guess Bernie Sanders, just because of the amount of energy the man has.
Yeah.
But I would say that I don't know if that's going to hurt Biden so much, because most Democratic, particularly the moderate Democratic votes, their number one priority, without thinking about it, will always be to put the person who they think can defeat Donald Trump in.
Yes.
And they think that, quite understandably, is Joe Biden. And every other candidate has a real hard time.
He's the only one with any kind of, I suppose, establishment clout behind him.
Yes, and
which didn't help Hillary in the last one, but
not in the general. But the thing that Joe has going for him as well, even more so than Hillary, is that he has a lot more backing within the African American community.
Yes,
and that is really important in the Democratic primary.
We've talked about this before, but the African American community of America is not socialist.
No, they are not. They're actually compared to a lot more socially conservative than their white Democrats.
I mean, that's relatively similar to here. I mean, the black community of Britain is, particularly in London, is very usually Labour voting, but very much more socially conservative.
Yes, I mean they're a lot more religious than the average Londoner, the black Londoners.
Yeah.
And also you see that within even statewide elections in the South, where pretty much most Democrats are, by British standards, are anti-abortion. Yeah. Even if they've got wearing the blue rosette.
I mean, Biden, who does represent, what does he represent? I was thinking it's a southern state.
He was from the South. I can't remember what state it was from, but he was from the South originally.
There was some talk or some controversy around his views during the 70s in regards to these kind of like later, kind of remnants of Jim Crow laws that sticked around in the South. So things like sort of segregational issues on buses and stuff like that.
I think what you might be referring to is his relationship with senators who supported that.
His willingness to compromise.
Well, it was right near the beginning of the campaign where he was trying to be the guy who brought red and blue together, trying to sort of bring the temperature down. Yeah. And he was saying, look, I got on and had good relationships with people who I opposed vehemently on things, even people as bad as pro-segregationists. Yeah. And he got a lot of slack from that. And I would argue that he got probably a little bit more attacked from that, probably a little bit too disproportionately, because people wanted to drive home the fact that he wasn't a friend to the African American community, which is where a lot of his base are.
Which I suppose the new wing of the party which did attack him for that I think they want to try and win the African American vote because in general they don't have it.
Yes, this is what Kamala Harris was trying to do, and she failed spectacularly.
In the cities, they have the Hispanic vote, but they don't tend to have them rurally or out in the towns. They have them in the likes of New York.
Yes, and that's they tend to generally vote Democrat, but not to the same proportional extent as African Americans.
Yeah, I mean, because in general, certain Hispanic communities do have big bases of Republican voters.
Yes,
which
yes.
runs kind of contrary when you think about it, but
it does.
I suppose the settled Mexican base does. Yeah.
Well, there's there was a famous Ronald Reagan quote, because Ronald Reagan got a very high proportion of the Hispanic vote at the time, whereas he said Hispanic people are natural conservatives. They're family-orientated, church-going, pull them up by a bootstrap size of people. And he was the last Republican to really drive that message home and win at it. But you can see that a lot of Republicans in 2008, particularly John McCain, were trying to recreate that.
Yes.
But they kind of shit about that by nominating a guy who said they're rapists and they're killers and they're coming to kill us.
I mean, that'd be a pretty hard one to win the Hispanic vote.
Exactly.
Even though there's like the settled Mexican communities, particularly in the likes of Texas, that did still vote for him.
There are like that, and particularly in Texas is an interesting case because for a long time people were predicting that Texas would go blue because of the changing demographics there, but it actually happened that more Hispanic people just turned Republican, particularly second generation.
It's like what we saw with the Indian community here. Like after a couple of generations, they were here, they were settled, they no longer saw themselves as foreigners. So they wanted to keep other foreigners out, and they went right wing.
That tends to happen, particularly with when it comes to when the community gets more wealthy, as it were.
Yeah, but I suppose also because of their because of their business interests, in the I suppose also that turned them kind of capitalist right.
And also, particularly like with the Hispanics, they are generally more conservative, socially conservative people. They're family orientated, very hardworking.
Yeah. We're at the 25-minute. Well, we just bumped over the 25-minute mark. So basically, again, breaking the fourth wall. We're going to go into a bit of party manifesto, just because, again, we covered this last week, but none of you heard it, and we were talking to avoid. So, party manifestos. So, Labour's has been released. Lib Dems has been released. Tories is out tomorrow, I think. Tom, take it away. What are your favourite parts of the Labour manifesto so far? And I know you love it.
Yes, it's my favourite manifesto. I think my favourite thing about
reading.
It's my favourite thing about it at all is that it is actually the most expensive manifesto in any country's history, effectively.
Yes,
because we can say that because obviously China doesn't have a manifesto because they don't have democracy, and Americans don't technically have manifestos, they have party platforms. So once we take all of that stuff out, it is astonishing. I think my favourite or least favourite worrying thing is how they've done the costing when it comes to corporation tax. Because currently we earn about 50 billion tax receipts when it comes to corporation tax, and Labour want to say that they're going to increase, gain an extra £30 billion from that, effectively increasing it by like 50-60% our actual tax receipts.
And when John McDonnell had to go on the radio last week and defend this on LBC, he basically let on that this was an ideological plan to essentially rid the UK of billionaires.
Yes, pretty much. He cares more about that companies pay what he would define as on a quote unquote fair rate of tax than actually trying to maximise the amount of tax receipts that we can get, which I would argue should be the goal of corporation tax, is to maximise the amount of tax receipts whilst not crippling business.
Well, not crippling business. I mean, that's why there's the argument for a flat tax system, is if you have a low enough rate across the board, which you could say, hey, look, we've lowered the rate, just fucking pay it. I mean, getting 5 to 10% from a large corporation is better than nothing.
Well, precisely, particularly when, and this is, I am quite disappointed in particularly the Tories for not mentioning this that much, but our corporation tax situation is more unique than most because of Ireland, because of the Republic of Ireland, which they have I think it's an 11 or 12% corporation tax rate, and
that's not as low as I thought it was.
It's pretty low for a country that size. It's the lowest of any major country in the EU.
And if you consider that Ireland is kind of seen as this low tax base, and most major corporations, these real blue chip corporations, all have bases there because of the low tax base rate. You would think it'd be lower than 11 or 12.
Well, we and in the UK have 19% right now, and that is one of the lowest in Europe, and it's definitely the lowest out of the major free economies.
Yep.
So the difference between, let's just say it's 12% for argument's sake, 12% and 19% for a major company is
it's
massive.
vast.
It's huge.
But the point I'm making, the way we talk about the Irish situation, the Irish kind of facilitation of businesses setting up there, or large corporations setting up a tax base there, you'd think, I mean that's still relatively high compared to what you'd think.
It's relatively high for a tax haven, but Ireland isn't a traditional tax haven because it does have, in the city of Dublin, a city that can support a headquarters of a major company.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't do that in Jersey. There's just not the structure there.
You can't do it in Luxembourg.
Exactly.
So there's kind of a quid pro quo kind of compromise issue there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, Ireland tried to. They actually haven't been as successful as they wanted to be in this, because in the late 80s, early 90s, they really tried to drive home, basically take all the business, financial business away from London and put it into Dublin.
Yep.
And it worked to a certain extent, but not to the extent that they wanted it to do.
Yep.
And I would argue that Boris Johnson should be making that point about it, but I can understand begrudgingly why he doesn't want to seem, even in the slightest, completely aside from Brexit point, be anyway looking like he's talking negatively about Ireland.
Yes.
Because there's just a really, really bad taste in the mouth that leaves with an English Prime Minister talking badly about Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, just post Troubles, any kind of disagreement with the Republic's government is just going to be, well, one, it's going to be fodder for any government in the Republic.
Yep.
And you're talking about a time in history now where really the Republic don't mention us unless it comes to cross-border disputes.
Yes, pretty much. We're not. They don't want us to be part of their politics, and we don't want them to be part of their politics. But it is more encompassed, I would say, on people who don't have to worry about that political messaging, such as journalists.
Yep.
And to be fair, I've seen quite a few journalists when they're talking to particularly John McDonnell challenge him on this Irish point.
Yep.
But it's something that isn't being talked about as much in the corporation tax question, particularly because it just looks really bad politically.
Just to get away from corporation tax, what is your next favourite part of the Labour manifesto?
I would have to say that the least favourite nationalisation of the many that they're doing would be the broadband one, I would say.
Broadband and fibre optic installation. This is fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
It's ridiculous because it's actually worked out relatively well, I would say, the way that we've been working our telecommunications for ever since they were privatised.
I will say the competitiveness within the broadband market and the general customer service we now get in regards to the quality of broadband we now get has, in the last 5 years alone, has just gone through the roof.
Yes, I would argue that as well, because there's more competition there. Yes. You have obviously the big boys, the BTs and the Virgins, but you've also got smaller companies like PlusNet. Yeah. Who sort of nip at the heels of the big boys and make sure
the quality of broadband connection from now, think back maybe 10, 15 years ago, how shit it was.
Yeah.
Generally, and you had a few companies dominating. You had people like PlusNet at the time. I can't think of anyone else. Obviously, BT. BT were the big boys of broadband back then.
Yes.
And it just again, as you said, competition has created this need for both good service and good connection.
And there's also the point about what happens when an industry dies.
Yes.
So landline telephones, for instance, is a good example. What would happen if we never privatised BT and we were still in the business as a government, as a publicly owned business of having landline telephones? You can't get rid of them because a lot of people still rely on them, but they are effectively a loss making now because most people don't really use them.
I mean, obviously, this is kind of leading to the question of what would happen if it meant there was just a full government monopoly on the broadband system. No competition, no private companies, just broadband being looked over and looked after by a government institution.
Yep.
I mean, could you think of anything worse?
Pretty much no. But the only thing I could possibly think of worse if it was all if it was a state-sponsored monopoly, sort of like in the vice of the old monopolies of like soap and the East India Company or something.
Yeah.
That might be the only worst option.
You mean the old like heroin war days where again
where basically you were given a royal charter. It was a private company, but you were given a legitimate saying you can earn this money privately, but nobody else can compete with you. That's the only thing worse than a state-owned.
I mean, that's essentially again is just equally as communist as just having a government institution.
It's equally anti free market capitalist ideas. And one of the things as well, which I think was the sort of glaring trustworthiness, because speaks to the overall trustworthiness not just of the leadership but the Labour Party in general, is that at one point they're arguing that they're going to nationalise all these industries, and 80% of the party is also arguing to remain within the European Union, which is going to be a real struggle because the EU would not like any of those policies.
Well, yeah, I mean it's a catch-22. So essentially, if you were to have a Labour government implement or to try to implement the the policies that Corbyn is promising, well, you couldn't under the EU because you have obviously competition laws. You have laws against state ownership of certain sectors, i.e. transport.
Yep, state aid rules where you can't sponsor as much. I mean, they even apply to us stuff like the Research and Development Tax Credit, whereas that's limited due to EU state aid rules.
The question is there, though, is that a ploy, not a ploy, is that a trick by Corbyn to essentially, if he was to win the next election, which obviously he won't, if, obviously is a promise they'd put forward a second referendum, he knows in his own head that the reality is that Leave would still just win a second referendum and he'd be able to enact what he wants when we leave the EU.
It's an interesting idea. Maybe he would try and get his old school wing of the party to sort of make the argument, look, we've nationalised these industries, we'd have to privatise them again if we went back, if we remained in the EU.
We can't go back on this, we can't stay part of the EU, we're leaving, goodbye. And obviously, the authoritarian old left wing of the Labour is going to force through a Brexit like nothing. Like, I mean, people talked about the current leadership of the Tory party trying to force through Brexit via Parliament. You will see no action taken in Parliament. We would just leave the EU under a more kind of authoritarian old left.
Would they go full no deal then, you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on an ideological level, you know that this current leadership of the Labour Party is driven by ideology. They do not want McDonnell and... Well, I don't know about McDonnell, but I know Corbyn does not want a free trade deal because that means, again, compromising with the free trade capitalists.
Right. So I suppose it would also give them a reason to go full...
Again, this is speculation. I could be wrong, but yeah.
Interestingly, I'd like to ask you a question about the Lib Dem manifesto, actually, and what policies you like about it and what policies you think are maybe going a bit well.
So most of the Lib Dem manifesto so far has mainly just been sort of token throwing. So you've had the policy in regards to free childcare for children over the age of 9 months. They haven't given the costings on that. Most, or any real costings, most of the new promises in the Lib Dem manifesto have not been costed.
That's interesting, because Labour have given costings. They're not worth the paper they're written on, but at least they've given some type of costings.
And this is where I've got to be critical of quote-unquote my party. It's the same old Lib Dem manifesto.
There's no major thing, because last time the only real major change in policy was actually the legalisation of weed.
Well, that's in this manifesto. Right. It's not spoken about too much because it's just not that big a vote winner as you think.
No, and the people that are going to vote for it because of it are probably already going to vote Lib Dem or possibly Labour anyway.
I think, to be honest, most legalised weed guys are probably Labour voters.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, and I'll speak from experience here, most people who want the weed to be legalised recognise that it is not the most important issue of this general election.
No, the reality is...
even if you took out Brexit, it wouldn't be the most important issue.
But just to take away the main manifesto promise, which is, block Brexit or stop Brexit, good luck.
Yeah.
I will be voting Lib Dem in the next election, but this is a flaw that stop me. Well, actually, the main reason for not voting Lib Dem in the last election was actually Farron. I didn't believe in Farron as Prime Minister. I don't necessarily believe in Swinson as Prime Minister. But I think this time round, I just don't care enough anymore to really think about leadership. I just kind of want to throw my vote out there.
Okay.
As opposed to actually my vote meaning anything. I'd rather just throw the vote out there and hopefully in some minuscule way fuck up the vote count in my local constituency of Chingford and Woodford Green, because it has been... I don't care about the fact of living in a conservative constituency, because the reality is, if that's what represents the local constituency, that's what it represents. But it's been IDS all of my life. Ian Duncan Smith has been my MP all of my life. He needs to lose power, not because I necessarily disagree with him on policy, which I do. You just need to get rid of him. He's held the seat for too long.
I do agree with you on a principle level there about how there does seem to be the problem with safe seats, as it were.
Yeah.
Because it is the case where
the funny thing is with this idea of IDS it being a safe seat, Labour are actually fully pushing forward with a campaign to oust him, because we're now one of the big marginals for this campaign, for this election.
Interesting.
Because he was down to a 2,000 or 3,000 majority in the last election.
Right.
In Chingford and Woodford Green. So if anyone knows the kind of political makeup of this constituency, Chingford and Woodford Green are two areas of outer North East London, both relatively... They're kind of mixed up between relatively urban and relatively leafy, but Chingford and Woodford are two very different places. Chingford's generally more, for the most part, what you would call kind of right-wing working class. Yeah. If it wasn't for Woodford Green being attached to him in the constituency, it probably would have gone fucking BNP years ago.
And it's interesting with those two because they're actually in separate boroughs.
So Chingford is in Waltham Forest, Woodford's in Redbridge. Woodford is what I'd call a relatively sensible conservative voting area. So what I mean by that is it's kind of centre-right, but it's centre-right for economic reasons, because a lot of people that live in Woodford are professionals.
Yeah, it's on the central line, so you get a lot of people going into the city from there.
Yeah, where Chingford doesn't have that. Most people in Chingford are Chingford through and through. Chingford's a kind of place where you're from there if you live there.
Yeah.
Families have lived there forever. Most people don't choose to move to Chingford,
which is becoming increasingly rare, and particularly in London. Yeah. Whereas most people who live in an area of London will have not lived there for entire life.
The funny thing is, the southern wards of the constituency, which I live in the last few years have gone Labour, mainly because that area of Chingford is actually very urbanly developed. There's a lot of council estates. It borders on Walthamstow, which is a big Labour stronghold. So they've gone Labour years ago, but the majority for the Labour Party in those wards is going up, and then in the bordering wards, the votes for the Labour Party have gone up to the point where, one, it stripped IDS of a lot of its majority in the last election, but Woodford Green could topple the balance of this in this coming election, because it could potentially go Lib Dem.
It's interesting though, because I think, as I say, when you mentioned for economic reasons, I would, I don't have the data in front of me, but I would be quite confident in predicting that Woodford Green would, for a Conservative area, would be relatively pro-Remain.
Yeah, well, I mean, Woodford Green is a wealthier area than Chingford. Woodford, I don't understand why they're in the same constituency. They're two very different areas. They just happen to vote Tory. But Woodford Green, again, as we said, there's a lot of professionals, a lot of people work in banking, so there's going to be a lot of Remain voters. And it actually turned out that in the last in the EU referendum, the constituency, Chingford and Woodford Green, marginally voted to remain part of the EU. Yeah. Guess what it was? It was 52-48.
Yeah. Surprisingly, a load of those statistics come out. Either pro-Remain or pro-Brexit. It's amazing how many marginal constituencies there are actually across the country.
And Chingford, if it was on its own, if it wasn't part of a constituency with Woodford Green, with the exception of Hymes Park, which is quite a big Labour area, it would have surged forward as a Leave area.
That's very interesting. So
But we were talking about fucking party manifestos, weren't we?
Yes, we were moving on to the Lib Dem one, and if there's any, so there's not any major policies which you're either, oh, this is a great idea or this is a terrible idea, because it seems to be quite a similar
in the most
policy.
part, it's the same manifesto for the last election under Farron, legalise cannabis, free childcare for children over a certain age.
And bollocks to Brexit in all but name.
Bollocks to Brexit.
Yeah.
It doesn't particularly excite me. To be fair, for my own, again, quote unquote party, they never particularly excite me in any way. That's probably why I vote for them.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Yeah. It's interesting you talk about excite, because I was thinking, well, not a lot of people get excited about it, but I did see one person who was extremely excited about the Labour manifesto, and I just thought this is probably actually going to do you more damage than good. Where
you're not going to get what you're promised. Well, you're not going to get a Labour government for one.
No, but it was what's her face, Lily Allen on Snapchat.
Oh, what happened there?
Who she was literally crying on Snapchat because how much she liked the Labour manifesto. Quite literally, and I'm like, yeah, you're probably actually losing more votes because you're doing that.
I'm indifferent because it means nothing, because they will not win the next election.
No.
As much as I don't want a Johnson Tory government run by the ERG. You're not going to get a Labour government. It ain't happening.
No.
Point being, I mean, look, I hate the term virtual signalling because it's a loaded term, but I mean, that's virtual signalling.
Pretty much. And I think it actually appeals more to the type of upper middle class yuppies than it does actually appeal to the work of the traditional Labour.
Well, I wouldn't say yuppies, because yuppies are economically and fiscally astute. These are people that work in finance. So you're talking more hipsters, really.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, I'm playing a bit of semantics there. I mean, Lily Allen, I mean, she comes out every so often and does some kind of weird, like, I stand with this cause.
She's more known for political virtue signaling than she is for her music these days.
I mean, yeah, because as far as I know, she hasn't put out a successful record in about 10 years.
Yeah, pretty much.
The last time she put out a successful record, she was looking fucking damn fine. How's she looking nowadays? I've not seen her in a long time.
I'm not too sure. I did actually see her live once at a Bee Festival.
Really?
Yeah, she came on and was talking about cricket scores and everything. It was amazing. Right.
Yeah. It says it all.
Yeah.
Cricket scores.
Well, that's pretty much it. And of course, she wouldn't be famous if it wasn't for her acting dad. Which is always a funny thing.
there is an answer. Just a quick sidetrack. There is a question there that has she actually out-famed her old man?
Possibly these days. More young people certainly know more about her than Keith Allen. Yeah. But,
I just remember him from like random shitty BBC programmes when I was a kid in the 90s.
Yeah, pretty much. I think he's been in a few big things, but no, I can remember off the top of my head. Our parents' generation know a lot more. Yeah. He's a lot more famous than that.
Point being, going back to, so I mean, what was she cried because
because how good it was, in her own words. Just like, it's amazing, it's going to completely transform society. And it's just like, yeah.
My question is, what would have happened if she was at the first Warsaw Pact meeting in 1946?
It's a good question.
Would she have cried then? Would she have been so happy? Flows of tears?
Yeah, we've avoided war. It's like,
well, no, we've avoided war. With all the same. I mean, you're talking about similar promises that the communist parties of early Eastern Europe communism all promised, and to be fair, they just bankrupted their fucking countries, and they were shitty services.
Which is effectively what the main argument against Labour would be, is that you would nationalise all these services and they would just go to shit.
Or look at Venezuela for a more recent. Okay, again, we're talking to people our age who can't remember communist Eastern Europe particularly well. Look at Venezuela. Venezuela's a bit of an extreme circumstance because it was a country that already had a lot wrong with it before it went.
True, but it did have one thing going for it, which was the oil money. Yeah. And that was the one thing that the socialists would argue before Venezuela was, well, it was just because there wasn't enough investment.
It does make me
There's always never enough investment.
That government is referred to as kind of socialist. I mean, they are full on communist.
Yeah, now they are, certainly. And under
militaristic communist.
Yeah, pretty much. And they are they are a stereotypical 20th century socialist communist
absolutely.
government, Marxist-run government now. And it's difficult as well because I don't know if you've seen what's been going on in Bolivia lately.
Yeah, the riots and protests in Bolivia.
where you've got one of those situations where it's arsehole on all sides.
Yep.
Where you've got a former anti-democratic socialist government who's just been ousted.
Yep.
But the people who are replacing them are doing so through an undemocratic coup and are Christian fundamentalists.
The name of their president, their socialist president, he escapes me, but they're like squatty little guy with a wig.
Yeah.
He's been in power there for years. I can never remember his name. Has he been ousted?
He has basically been ousted now.
Because I've been hearing rumblings on the last few days, again because of work. I've not been able to really sit down and read stuff.
He's been ousted, and then there's this senator who has declared herself the interim president.
Are we seeing a South American spring? Because overnight there was a protest that led to a bombing and killing of 3 policemen in Colombia.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of this.
I think in Bogota, but I'm not too sure.
We might be seeing that because it generally happens that when one country sort of goes,
do we necessarily want a South American spring? I mean, looking at the Middle East, do you really? I mean, there was only one good thing that come out of the Arab Spring, and that was essentially Libya.
Yeah.
Not Libya.
Not Libya.
Oh, no, that was the worst bit to come out. Tunisia, sorry.
Yeah.
Libya was the worst thing to come out of the Arab Spring.
The country formerly known as Libya, if I like to call it. Because it's not really, it's a complete failed state now.
It's a failed state broken up into different factions and
Yeah, and it's despite the fact that it appears on the map as Libya, that's just because
it's just because it's enclosed by borders.
Yeah, pretty much. It's it is an interesting question about this. This sort of goes to the question of the neoconservative foreign policy of the mid-2000s about, well, we need to give these people freedom because if they have freedom, they'll increase their they'll increase their wealth and everything will be great. It's like, but it's been shown by multiple countries now, even if you do give people quote unquote freedom,
they don't tend to become, family people who then start businesses and then start to vote for new presidents. They just end up killing each other.
Yeah, I mean, look at a country, particularly Egypt, I think would be the best example of
that. Do you know what it was? You said it was the early to mid-2000s because, again, the neoconservative period of, again, Iraq, blah, blah, blah. I think it was on the back of Eastern Europe.
Yes, I think you're right about that.
I think it was on the fall of the Berlin Wall.
That was the justification that people were using to try and spread that.
Because it worked, but those countries generally are Western cultures and share the same general cultural outlook as America anyway.
Well, they've been exposed to liberals' ideas as long as they've been around, just not implemented them in the country. Whereas
because they had a forced 50 years of authoritarianism.
People in the Arab world really don't. They just haven't been exposed to the liberal type of democracies as opposed to, apart from through Israel.
Yeah.
So that they think of liberal democracy as
the country they've rejected for 50 years. So
yes. Speaking of that, we might want to briefly speak about the political situation that's going on in Israel at the moment with Bibi Netanyahu.
Well, I mean, we're looking at the third election.
We're looking at the most likely.
Have you ever looked at a breakdown of an Israeli election?
Oh, they're absolutely nuts.
Crazy.
They're crazy. The amount of parties that are there.
I think there's usually about 10 front-running parties.
Yes, and they range all the way from the sort of pro-Arab, pro-Palestinian parties
to Russian immigrant sort of interest groups.
To sort of ultra-orthodox or
just
theocratic parties.
On that, because the majority of the population that has moved to Israel are actually Russian.
Yeah,
despite what some arsehole anti-Semites will tell you that they're American or British, the majority of people that have moved to Israel are Russian.
Yes.
And there's actually a lot of Israelis that don't speak Hebrew. A lot of them speak Russian.
Yes. And there's it tends to be the people that are more sort of Israeli came from Central Europe when it first created, but more recent immigrants.
It started with Poland and Hungary and Romania, and then it turned, later on it became Russia, and now Russia still is sending a lot of people to Israel.
And going back to the current political situation there, just to do a quick summary, Bibi Netanyahu has been the longest serving Prime Minister of Israel ever, has now been indicted under three different types of corruption charges, all relating to different issues. And he could technically be the Prime Minister of the election of Israel whilst under indictment, which is a very interesting and unique situation, and will not help Israel at all on their international standing.
Where does this go?
it most likely ends up with another election early next year, and I would predict that it's more likely that the secondary party, the Blue and White Party, which isn't really a left-wing party, it's more of a more moderate conservative party in Israel.
Because generally liberal parties don't tend to do well outside of Tel Aviv.
Yes, pretty much. Yeah. There's no one who we would even call a social democratic party in Israel that has a chance of winning the election over there. But I would imagine that I think his name is Benghazi, not Benghazi. It's something Ghazi. He is probably going to do a little bit better in that election, possibly even get the most majority of seats, because he was very, very close, if not just short of it this time, because of the indictment charges against Netanyahu.
I mean, the thing is, once Netanyahu steps down, and it seems to be that you're having election after election because Netanyahu essentially refuses to step down.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I mean, the last polling I saw showed that he's still pretty popular in the country.
He is. He is a big acolyte of Trumpian-style politics, where he wasn't like this in the beginning of his career. No, but he's seen what Trump has done over there, and he's basically
he's always been a good weather sort of vein to find what way Western politics is going.
Yeah, bellwether.
Yeah, that's it. Weather vein.
Just hook it to my veins.
It's the old school term for a bellwether that sits on top of a house and blows side to side. Yeah. But, I mean, generally, we are in a really funny period for probably the last 5 or so years where the reactionary right and the hard right now actually love Jews. So they all kind of look to Israel as...
Yes, it's sort of like almost the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And
that's what happened. Where like the hard right have obviously taken the hard stance in the last nearly 20 years against Islam, in this kind of reactionary internet age... has now pushed the hard right of the Republican Party in America and in what you'd call like the new right, which is just kind of twats on the internet essentially. Towards and the far right towards loving Israel and Jews, which is a thing you've never seen in Western politics before.
Yes, it's a more type of populist thing. I think it comes as particularly more right-wing people were redefining Western society, which they used to define as Christian society, as Judean Christian society.
Yeah.
And that's what people want to allegedly protect from the influences of
but they won't spring to Abrahamic because that includes all three. Yeah.
Nail on the head.
Yeah. Right, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. To be fair, at the moment, there's not a whole lot to talk about in regards to party manifestos. I want to see the Conservative one that I think comes out tomorrow.
Be interested to see how costed it is compared to the Labour one.
How costed it is and kind of how empty it is.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think we touched on that at the start, as they seemingly run out of ideas, and the only ideas that they kind of have is more moderate versions of policies that they had reversed over the last 2 years.
Yeah. Right, I think we're going to call it there. Adios. Sorry for that, all that.
See you later.